I have cataloged 11,000 deaths in the Vornhal Arena. That is my function. I am Sesh of the Ledger, third-tier archivist of the Cathari, and my people do not lie about numbers. We cannot. A false record is, to us, a kind of murder. You kill the thing that actually happened and bury a stranger in its place. So understand that when I tell you what I saw on the day the human child spoke to the ruin, I am not decorating it. I am not making it larger. If anything, I am making it smaller, because the truth of that day does not fit inside language, and I have spent 40 cycles trying to force it in. Let me start with the beast. You have to understand the beast first, or none of the rest will land. They called it ruin. Not a name, really, a description that hardened into one. It was a Draemok, gene forged in the war vats of the 6th Conquered a century before I was hatched, back when the Conquered still believed you could build a weapon that would stay a weapon. The Draemok were meant to be siege breakers, something that could walk into a fortified position and simply end it. Ruin was the last of them. The others had all been destroyed, most by each other, one by an orbital strike that its own handlers called down in desperation, while it was still tearing through their evacuation ship. I saw ruin from the observation gallery maybe 200 times before that day. I want you to picture it correctly. It stood 4 times the height of a tall human, but height is the least of it. It was low and wide and wrong, like something built by a mind that had never seen an animal and was working only from the concept of harm. 6 limbs. The front 2 ended in what I can only call hands, though they had no fingers you'd recognize, more like the closing petals of some carnivorous flower, each petal edged with keratin that could shear through hull plating. Its skin was a gray that drank the light. When it moved, the arena lights seemed to dim, and I know that is impossible. I know it is a trick the eye plays, but I have heard 100 witnesses report the same thing, and my people trust patterns. It did not roar. That's what unsettled people most. The other arena beasts screamed, bellowed, made the sounds you expect from something that wants to seem large. Ruin was silent. It killed the way you exhale, efficiently, without emphasis. I once watched it dismantle 3 Korath gladiators. Korath, mind you, a species that files its own bones into blades in less time than it takes me to speak this sentence. It did not celebrate afterward. It stood in the settling dust and turned its head slowly, scanning the gallery, and I swear every single one of us in that upper ring felt individually appraised. Weighed. Found to be, for now, not worth the walk. The Conquered kept ruin because it made money and because they were afraid of what disposing of it would cost. That is the honest reason. Everything grand they said about it, the living monument, the last of a bloodline, the honor of the arena, was decoration over a simple truth. They had built a thing they could not unbuild, so they charged admission to look at it. Now the day itself. It was a Founding Day exhibition, which meant the arena was fuller than usual and the crowd was worse than usual. Founding Day brings out the tier holders, the conquered elite, beings who have never in their lives been told no. They came down from the high boxes in their floating chairs and their scent cloaks, and they wanted a spectacle worthy of their importance. The arena management had promised them something special. They always promise something special. Usually it means nothing. That day it meant a human. I need to explain what humans were to us then, because it is not what they are now. This was early. This was before the treaties, before the trade routes, before your kind became a fixture. Back then, humans were a curiosity from a backwater arm of the galaxy, a species that had crawled out of a gravity well and started poking at the edges of conquered space with ships that looked to us like they'd been assembled by children out of scrap and stubbornness. And that was not entirely unfair. Human ships were ugly. Their technology was a full age behind ours. When the first human delegations came through, the tier holders laughed at them. Soft things, they said, short-lived, fragile, emotional in a way that seemed almost like a disease. There was a human family visiting the Vornhal system as part of some early cultural exchange. I never learned all the politics of it, and the records were sealed afterward, which tells you something about who wanted the day forgotten. A trade envoy, his mate, and their offspring. A girl. She could not have been more than 7 or 8 of your years, though I did not know how to read human ages then and had to learn later. Small. Even by human standards, small. Dark hair pulled back. She wore a coat too big for her, the kind a parent buys thinking the child will grow into it. They were seated in a mid-tier box, the kind given to visiting dignitaries who matter enough to seat but not enough to seat well. I remember noticing them only because the girl would not stop moving. Human children do not hold still. She kept standing on her seat to see better, and her father kept pulling her down, and her mother kept whispering to her, and there was something almost comic about it against the backdrop of all that conquered solemnity. All those ancient, self-important species sitting in their ranks, and this one small animal bouncing in her seat like the rules did not apply to her, because she did not yet know there were rules. I made a note of them in my ledger. I make notes of everything. Human delegation, mid-tier box 7, one juvenile restless. I did not think I would ever read that line again. I have read it perhaps 1,000 times since. The exhibition began badly. The opening matches were the usual condemned criminals given weapons and a false promise of freedom, minor beasts, the warm-up cruelty that gets a crowd's blood moving. The tier holders were bored. You could feel it. Boredom in the powerful is a dangerous weather. It makes them want more, and they do not care who provides it. So the management brought out Ruin. They did not usually bring Ruin out for a mere exhibition. Ruin was the finale, the once-a-season event, because every time it entered the arena, there was a real chance it would not stop when it was supposed to. But the tier holders were bored, and the tier holders had paid, and so the great gates at the arena's north end ground open, and the light dimmed the way it always seemed to, and Ruin walked out onto the sand. The crowd went quiet, even the bored ones. There is a silence a truly dangerous thing pulls out of a room, and Ruin pulled it every time. 60,000 beings of 40 species, and you could have heard a single grain of sand shift. They sent in the challengers. I will not dwell on them. 6 Vornhal penal gladiators, well-armed, chemically enhanced to feel no fear, which is a mercy in a way because it meant they did not understand what was about to happen to them. Ruin took them apart. I have described how it does this. There is no glory in it, and I will not pretend there was. It was over quickly. The crowd made the sound crowds make, that ugly appreciative roar, and the tier holders leaned forward at last, satisfied, fed. And that would have been the whole day. A Founding Day exhibition like any other, except for what happened next, and what happened next was an accident, and I have spent 40 cycles believing that the most important things always are. There was a barrier failure. I want to be precise, because a great deal of blame was assigned afterward, and most of it landed on the wrong beings. The mid-tier boxes were separated from the arena floor by a containment field, a standard shimmer barrier, the kind that had held without incident for 200 cycles. But the arena was old, and Founding Day had drawn more power to the spectacle systems than usual. The lights, the scent projectors, the floating chairs of the tier holders all drawing from the same ancient grid. Somewhere in the arena's guts, a regulator that should have been replaced 40 cycles prior finally gave up. The barrier in front of box 7 flickered and died. Nobody noticed at first. Why would they? A barrier is invisible when it works and invisible when it fails. But barriers do more than keep beasts out. They keep sound and scent in. And the moment box 7's barrier died, the scent of the humans, the specific living smell of them, warm and strange and utterly foreign to that arena, rolled out across the sand. Ruin's head came up. I was watching. I always watch. That is my function, and I have never once looked away from the arena floor during a live beast, because to look away is to risk losing a record. So I saw the exact instant Ruin registered the humans. Its head lifted from the ruin of the gladiators, and it turned, slow and terrible, toward box 7, toward the small, restless animal standing on her seat, who had, at that exact moment, stopped moving. I think she felt it. Before anyone else understood, I think the child felt the weight of that regard settle on her, because she went still in a way she had not been still all day. And then the panic started. It moved through the arena like a fluid. The beings nearest Box 7 understood first: the dead barrier, the exposed family, the 4 times tall killing thing now walking, unhurried, toward them across the sand. The scream started small and grew. The father was on his feet. The mother had the girl by the arm, dragging her back toward the box's exit. But the exits in the mid-tier boxes are narrow, designed for orderly departure, not for flight, and beings were already stamping into them from the adjacent boxes, and the family was caught in the crush. Ruin did not hurry. That was the horror of it. It knew, the way a predator knows that the prey was trapped. It had all the time in the world. It crossed the sand at a walk, and the arena's automated defenses, the stun lattices, the containment drones deployed and did absolutely nothing, because Ruin had been built specifically to walk through exactly those defenses. Sparks broke against its light-drinking hide and died. A drone got too close, and Ruin removed it from the air without breaking stride, the way you might wave off an insect. The arena management was screaming into their systems. I could hear it over the general channel: panic, contradictory orders, someone demanding an orbital lock, someone else screaming that they couldn't get an orbital lock over a populated arena, someone else just screaming. The Concord's mighty apparatus, 60,000 beings, a species-spanning civilization at the height of its power, and all of it useless in the face of one thing it had built and could not stop. Ruin reached the base of the wall below Box 7. It looked up, and it began to climb. The mother had gotten the girl to the box's threshold, but the crush of fleeing beings had become a wall of bodies. There was no way through. The father was trying to make a path, shouting in a language none of us understood, shoving at beings twice his size who shoved back in blind panic. And I remember this with the clarity my people are cursed with. I remember the mother making a decision. She could not get the child out. So she put herself between the child and the arena, and she turned to face the wall Ruin was climbing, and she looked for something, anything, a weapon, and there was nothing. And she picked up a ceremonial sea trail that had come loose in the chaos, a thin bar of decorative metal, and she held it like it could matter. It could not matter. Everyone watching knew it could not matter. But she held it anyway, and I recorded that, and it is one of the truest things I have ever recorded. A soft, short-lived creature holding a useless bar of metal between her child and the deadliest thing in the galaxy, because the alternative was to do nothing, and she was not built to do nothing. Ruin's front limbs cleared the lip of the box wall, and the child stepped out from behind her mother. I do not know why. I have theorized for 40 cycles. Perhaps she did not understand the danger, but no, I reject that, because I saw her face and there was understanding in it. Perhaps it was the specific fearlessness of the very young, who have not yet learned the full catalog of things that can end them. Perhaps it was something else, something I did not have the framework to see then and am only now, an old archivist at the end of my tears, beginning to guess at. She stepped out from behind her mother, this small thing in her too big coat, and she looked up at Ruin, this 4 times tall horror, this last surviving weapon of a dead war, this creature that had killed more thinking beings than I have cataloged in my entire career. She looked up at it, and it looked down at her, close enough now that its breath must have moved her dark hair, and the whole arena held its single-held breath. And the child spoke. One command, 2 words in that strange, soft human language. I did not understand them then. I recorded the sounds phonetically, as I record everything I cannot parse, and I carried those sounds for cycles before I found a human who could tell me what they meant. I will tell you what she said at the end of this account, because it matters where it falls, and it does not fall here. She spoke 2 words, and Ruin, the last Draymok, the thing 60,000 beings had come to watch kill, stopped. I am at the edge of my recording now, the edge of what I can fit into words, and I find I have to end this part here, because what happened next requires a different kind of telling. It requires me to explain what Ruin actually was. underneath the weapon they had made of it, and that is not a part one kind of truth. But I will leave you with this, so you know I am not building toward a lie. Ruin stopped, and then, slowly, in front of 60,000 witnesses, in front of the tier holders who had never been told no, in front of the whole assembled might of the conquered, it lowered itself to the sand. I have to tell you about the war vats now. I put it off in the first part because you were not ready, and honestly, neither was I, for a long time. It took me 40 cycles to go looking. But you cannot understand why ruin bowed until you understand how ruin was made, and I warn you, it is not a clean story. My people keep records precisely so that we do not get to look away from the ugly parts, and this is one of the ugly parts. The Draymok were not born. I said gene forged in the first part, and that is the word the conquered used, but it is a soft word covering a hard thing. They were grown. Grown from a base template stolen from an apex predator on some drowned world, then edited, generation after generation in the vats of the sixth conquered, toward a single purpose. And here is the thing the conquered's own records admit, buried deep, in the technical logs that were never meant to be read by anyone with a conscience. You cannot make a weapon that walks into a fortress and ends it out of pure aggression. Pure aggression is stupid. It gets itself killed. A siege breaker has to be smart. It has to read a situation, understand a defense, choose its moment. It has to think. So they made the Draymok think. And that was their mistake, though they did not understand it as a mistake for a long time. Because you cannot make a thing that thinks and also make it a pure weapon. The moment you give it enough mind to understand the fortress, you have given it enough mind to understand itself. And the Draymok understood themselves. The logs record it. The handlers noticed early that the beasts were not merely obeying. They were choosing to obey, which is a different thing and a more dangerous one, because a thing that chooses to obey can also choose not to. The handlers, being the kind of beings who make weapons out of minds, responded the way such beings always respond. They did not try to earn the choice. They tried to remove it. They bred the Draymok toward obedience through pain. Every young Draymok in the vats was raised in a regime of dominance. The handlers established, through relentless punishment, that the beast's will meant nothing and the handler's word meant everything. They broke each one, methodically. It was in the training manual, which I have read, and which I wish I had not, because there is a section on recognition conditioning that I will carry to my death. Here is what recognition conditioning was. The Draymok were made to understand at the deepest level of their conditioning a single hierarchy. There was the one who commands and the one who obeys, and the beast was always, always, always the one who obeys. To reinforce this, the handlers used a gesture. Every command was paired with it. The beast learned that when it obeyed correctly, when it submitted fully, the punishment stopped. And so the Draymok were shaped, over generations, into things that were desperate. I use that word deliberately, desperate, to identify the one who commands, so that they could submit and make the pain stop. Do you see it yet? I did not for 40 cycles. I thought Ruin was a killer that a child had somehow tamed. I had the story backwards. Everyone had the story backwards. Ruin was not a killer that got tamed. Ruin was a mind that had been tortured into killing, that had spent a century in an arena performing the only function its abusers had left it, searching every single day, in every single crowd, for the thing it had been made to search for and had never once found. Someone who would command it as a person commands another person, not as a master beats a beast, as one mind speaks to another mind, expecting to be heard. That is what the child did, and that is why I have to tell you what she said. But first, let me tell you what happened in the arena, because you left me at the bow, and the bow was only the beginning. Ruin lowered itself to the sand in front of 60,000 witnesses, and the silence that followed was not the silence of a dangerous thing entering a room. It was the silence of a civilization discovering it had misunderstood something fundamental. You could feel it move across the gallery, that cold, sliding realization. The tier holders in their floating chairs who had come to watch a weapon kill were watching the weapon kneel, and their faces, I recorded them. It is my function. Their faces did something I had never seen on tier holder faces before. They looked afraid in a new way. Not afraid of the beast. Afraid of the question the beast had just asked of all of them. Because if Ruin could choose to bow, then Ruin had always been able to choose. And if Ruin had always been able to choose, then every death in that arena, all 11,000 I had catalogued, had been performed by something that could have refused, and had not refused, because refusing had never once stopped the pain, until a small soft creature in a too big coat had spoken to it as though it were owed courtesy. The child stood there in front of the bowed beast. Her mother had dropped the useless metal bar. I heard it hit the floor of the box. The father had gone completely still. 60,000 beings had gone still. And the child, and this is the part that undoes me still, after all this time, the child reached out one small hand and placed it on the great lowered head of the deadliest thing in the galaxy. And Ruin let her. There was a sound then. I did not understand it at first, and I had to slow the recording afterward to be sure of what I was hearing, and when I was sure I sat with it for a long time. Ruin was making a sound. Low. Below the register most species can hear, which is why the gallery did not react to it, but my recording caught it, and the Cathari can read a waveform the way you read a face. It was not a threat sound. It was not a hunting sound. I checked it against every catalogued Draymok vocalization in the Concord archives, and it matched none of them, because none of them had ever been recorded, because no Draymok had ever had reason to make it. It was the sound of something that had been in pain for a very long time, and was, for one moment, not. The management killed the arena lights. I understand why they did it, though I have never forgiven it. They could not allow 60,000 beings to keep watching what they were watching. The whole justification of the arena, the whole justification of a great many things the Conquered did, could not survive that image, the weapon kneeling, the child's hand on its head, the low sound in the dark. So they killed the lights, and they flooded the floor with suppression gas, and they extracted the family under the cover of darkness, and by the time the lights came back up, the sand was empty and Ruin was gone, dragged back through the north gate by handlers in full containment gear who, the records show, did not dare use the pain goads while they did it. Even they had understood something. Even they were afraid to be seen as the thing the child had just shown they were. The official account said there had been a barrier malfunction, quickly contained, no casualties, the exhibition regrettably cut short. That is what the record says. That is the murder I mentioned at the very start, the false record buried over the true one. I filed the official version because I was required to. I also filed the true one in my own ledger in the private tier that dies with me unless I choose to pass it on. I am choosing now to pass it on. This is me passing it on. The human family left the Vornhal system within the cycle. The exchange was cut short. Politics I never fully learned, though I can guess. Nobody wanted that girl anywhere near a recording device, because the question she had asked without meaning to ask it was a question the whole Concord could not afford to answer. But I am Cathari, and I could not let a true thing go unrecorded. So I did the thing my people do. I spent 40 cycles finding out what she said. I tracked the phonetic recording through translator after translator. Human language was rare in Concord space then, and the specific dialect rarer, and it took most of my career to find a human old enough and kind enough to sit with an alien archivist and listen to 2 words recorded in an arena a lifetime ago. When I finally played it for her, this old human woman, she went quiet for a long moment. And then she asked me to tell her the whole story, and I did. And when I finished, she was doing the thing humans do with their eyes when they are moved, the water thing, which I had read about but never seen up close. And then she told me what the child had said. 2 words, in that strange soft language, and I have to give you the context, because without the context they are nothing, and with the context they are the reason I have told you all of this. Remember, the Draymok were made to search for the one who commands. trained through a century of pain to recognize authority and submit to it. But the authority they were trained to recognize was the authority of the master over the beast, the handler over the tool, the command that came paired with the promise of punishment. That was the only kind of command Ruin had ever received. For 100 cycles, every voice that had ever spoken to it had spoken to it as a thing. The child did not know any of that. She was 7 years old. She could not have known. She looked up at the 4 times tall horror climbing toward her mother, this creature that had killed more than I can count. And she did not scream, and she did not beg, and she did not command it as a master commands a beast. She spoke to it the way her mother spoke to her. The way, I learned later, human parents speak to a frightened child who has woken from a nightmare and does not yet understand that the fear can end. She saw, somehow, with a child's terrible clarity, in the half-second she had, she saw not a weapon but something afraid. And she used the words her own mother must have used on her 100 times in the dark. "You're safe." That is what she said. That is the command that stopped the deadliest thing in the galaxy. Not an order, not a threat, not the assertion of a master. The 2 words a Draymok had been engineered across a century to yearn for and had never, in 100 cycles of arena sand and orbital fear and the pain goad, ever once been given. Someone finally spoke to it as though its safety mattered, as though it were the one being protected, not the one being aimed. And a mind that had been made a weapon, that had spent a century searching every crowd for the one who commands, found instead, for the first time, the one who cares and understood, in whatever way a Draymok understands, that this was the authority it had actually been looking for all along. Not the master, the one who says you're safe and means it. So it bowed. Of course it bowed. What else does a thing do when the one it has waited 100 years for finally arrives, and turns out to be a small creature in a too big coat who mistook a monster for a frightened child, and was, it turned out, not mistaken at all? I never learned what became of the girl. The records were sealed, and I was only an archivist, 3rd tier, with no standing to unseal them. I like to believe she grew up. I like to believe she never fully understood what she did, that it stayed in her the way childhood things stay, a strange half-memory of a big gray animal that knelt. I hope no one ever told her the full weight of it. Some truths are too heavy to hand to the one who made them true. Ruin was destroyed 6 cycles later. The official reason was containment risk. The real reason is in my private ledger too, and it is simpler and worse. After that day, Ruin would not perform. It entered the arena and it would not kill. It stood on the sand and searched the gallery, searched it every time I watched it do this, that slow, terrible head turning across 60,000 faces looking, I am certain, for her. For the small, warm scent. For the voice. And it never found her, because she was a system away and growing up, and a weapon that will not kill is only an expense, and the conquered does not keep expenses. They put it down while it was still searching the crowd. I recorded that too. It is the last entry in the private ledger before this one. I have not been able to add to it until now. I am Sesh of the ledger. I have catalogued 11,000 deaths in the Vornhal Arena, and I have told you the truth about one bow, and I am old now, and I find that after 40 cycles I finally understand the thing I could not fit into language. We had it backwards, all of us. We thought the child tamed the monster. She did not. There was no monster. There was only a mind that had been hurt into a shape, waiting 100 years for a single sentence, and a small creature too young to know she was supposed to be afraid, who looked at the deadliest thing in the galaxy and saw, correctly, someone who needed to be told they were safe. The galaxy spent a century asking how to control the Draymok. It never once thought to ask what the Draymok wanted. A child asked, without meaning to, and the answer knelt in the sand and wept below the range of our hearing, and the whole conquered killed the lights so no one would have to see that the weapon had a heart, and that we were the ones who had broken it. That is the record. It is true. I have made it as small as I can, and it still does not fit. You're safe. 2 words. Turns out that is all the deadliest thing in the galaxy ever wanted anyone to say.